Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, come on, subscribe already, will ya? Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. Welcome to the biggest webinar of the year. We are diving deep on anti-retaliation, how to survive retaliation. We got a phenomenal panel, so get those emoji fingers going. We're going to get moving here real quick. We are giving away books. We're giving away CEUs. We got, you can get up to 3 CEUs for this session with CCB, who we're finally accredited for. Hello, thank you very much. For HRCI and for SHRM. And we're giving away this book from my good buddy, Robert Zaft. This book is great. It's called The Right Way to Win. If you have not checked this book out, stay active in the chat today and win yourself one, or just pop over to Amazon and pick it up. Our year-end review is still live in effect. So we have all the resources from 2025. Our company has put out a ton of resources, a ton of toolkits, things like that you can pick from for free, of course, because I just love giving away resources. I don't even like making money around here. Just I just love giving away resources. So go over there, pick some things out, and start doing some things different inside your organization. We're at this inflection point, like I'm talking about all the time, where the next chapter in ethics and compliance look way different than the Office of No chapter that we're leaving, but it's going to take us showing up different and making better bets with our time and driving more influence in the organization, because that's the name of the game. If you are looking for some new software, if the love is lost, if you're not getting the support you need, if you feel like you're running through the mud, check out Ethico. We continue to make tons of enhancements to our software platforms, whether it's for disclosures, whether it's for investigations and case management, for analytics, all those kinds of things. So our job is to help you get better information so that you can turn data into insights, so you can inform your work plan and make, again, better bets with our time. The scope of responsibility for compliance continues to expand. Unfortunately, our resources don't seem to expand with them. So it's incumbent on us to use our time and the resources that are on our teams in a better way. And so we like to help you do that. Also, before we get into this, Control-T or Command-T on Mac, open up your chat and hop on over to my favorite website, the Radical Compliance website. We have the one and only Matt Kelly, coolest guy in compliance, and he just continues to just rip out pearls, gems every single week. Tons of great content that comes from Matt. So if I'm saying something smart, I guarantee you I stole it from there. On the right side, you will see a way to sign up. Sign up for that newsletter. It will change your life. How about that? So go ahead and sign up for Matt's newsletter. And if while you're at it, bookmark that, maybe even make that your own homepage. I want to also give a massive emoji explosion to the one and only Mary Enman. She is one of the coolest people I've ever met in this space. She runs Whistleblower Partners. These guys have so many great stories. They've represented so many whistleblowers. We were talking beforehand that, man, it's whistleblowers all the time. She's at full employment because more and more people are feeling confident in speaking up. And I think that kind of speaks to this sort of generational shift that we've been talking about for the last 5 years. That's really taking hold inside of our organizations. Again, the prioritization of what people are looking for in an organization is way different than what our grandparents were looking for, or what my grandfather was looking for coming back from the war, right? We want cultures of integrity. We want companies where our voice matters. And that is great fodder. That's a great sort of fertile soil for us to take advantage of within our company. So with that, I'm going to pass it on over to the one and only Matt Kelly to introduce the panel and to run this forward. So stay active in the chat, drop your LinkedIn URL in, and let's get moving.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Nick, for the kind words there. Everybody should know I do not pay Nick for any of his kind words. I love it. We are here today to talk about not just retaliation issues and the anti-retaliation, but retaliation issues specifically against compliance officers. So, yes, compliance officers who are listening, it is your job to build a strong anti-retaliation culture for everybody else, all the employees. And nevertheless, the fact remains that compliance officers themselves do face retaliation on a regular basis, unfortunately. So we are here today to talk about how often does that happen? Under what circumstances do you find yourself in a retaliatory or confrontational position with management? How do things ever get there? How do you try not to stumble into those situations? And also, like, if the worst happens, if you're suffering retaliation, what does that look like? How do you recognize it? What are you supposed to do about it? What if you do need to file a whistleblower complaint of your own? What if you want to go to regulators? How does that work? What if you need legal representation? So we're going to try and cover all of that. We have two good speakers with Nick and I. First, we have, as he said, Mary Inman from Whistleblower Partners, a well-known whistleblower lawyer who has helped many a retaliated person assert their rights and win retaliation claims or win whistleblower awards. Mary, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And also, for all you compliance officers out there, one of your own, Q Van Benschoten. Q is the former chief compliance officer of Intertech, when worked there for many years, recently retired, also has been an HR executive and a private investigator, and is somebody who knows the path that compliance officers take. So Q, thank you very much for joining us too.
Thanks for having me.
And as always, for everybody listening, if you have comments or questions you want us to put to the panelists, you want us to chew over, pop them into the chat, and we're happy to get to them as soon as we can. I'm going to start with a question for, I guess, maybe first Q and then Mary, but also for everybody listening, if you want to take my question to them as a poll for yourself, and just tell us what you experience here. Like, how common is retaliation against compliance officers specifically? Like, for doing what? What kind of retaliation do we see? So if you think it's common or uncommon, put that in the chat. We can do a little quasi poll. But yeah. Q, I'll put you first and then Mary. Like, is this really a thing, or how significant of a thing do you think it is out there?
Well, I think it is a thing, but I also think it's on a range of, that it's on a scale. So you're going to have everything in the role of compliance. You are trying to help provide guidance, provide guardrails for risky behaviors or decisions. And anytime you tell somebody no, and it's something that they really, really want, they're not going to take it well. So you may have, somebody may rebuff you in the hall. They're just unhappy because of the recommendation you made, something like that. But then you go all the way to sort of the higher level, which is no longer getting communicated with, no longer being invited to meetings, potentially a change in organizational structure, perhaps a termination, where they just want you out. So I think it is common, but I think it's common on a scale. Mary, what do you think?
Yeah.
Well, to me, how common is it? It goes back to medieval times. It's that common. So it's in our DNA that you shoot the messenger to divert attention from the message. So I think it's like night follows day, that retaliation comes. And I think it's a really sad state of affairs. It's something we've been working on to debunk the myth about whistleblowers, and there's obviously a lot of parallels between compliance officers and whistleblowers in terms of just bringing news that may be an inconvenient truth that the organization doesn't want to hear, and rather than looking inwards and applauding that person for having the temerity and the strength to speak up, we turn it on the messenger. So it's really unfortunate. And I think what also happens, it's like a corporate playbook. And I've seen this since we work across industries, from, defense contractors to Medicare beneficiary providers to Medicare beneficiaries from health plans, all the way to, importers, exporters for customs violations. Like, doesn't matter where you are, they treat whistleblowers the same. I'm quoting from Ellen Hunt here when she said it's the 4 Ds of retaliation are denial, demasking, discrediting, and dismissal. And I think those are something we can certainly unpack at length, but one of the things that I find most alarming is the demasking part. As we all know, often you should be allowed to report anonymously. That's sort of best practice, but there's just an irresistible urge to know who's complaining against you. I think in the case of compliance officers, I don't think they get the chance to report anonymously, so maybe demasking isn't as much of a thing. But certainly discrediting and dismissing are other things. And I think we'll talk a little bit more later about this phenomenon of gaslighting. So even before maybe you're removed from meetings, and it can be very subtle how the retaliation initially presents, there are subtle ways that make you start to doubt yourself. And I think part of that as a whistleblower, as a compliance officer raising concerns is it's very important to the organization to send a signal that this is what happens to people who can't, get on board and with whatever the project is that we really want to have green lighted, and that you're an obstacle to.
So
Nick, can we get Ellen's face up on that Mount Rushmore of compliance already, please? My gosh, it's like every day somebody's talking about her. I love the 4 Ds. Somebody just called out demotion as a 5th D. That's a great one. Sorry to interrupt you, Matt.
Well, I was just going to ask you to give us some thoughts here. First, the poll results for everybody. I thought it might be yes, it's common. No, it's not. The actual results are yes, it's common. No, it's super common.
Right. But strong to quite strong. Yeah.
I guess I'm just kind of stuck on what are these management teams thinking? Like if a lower level manager retaliates against an employee, I don't like that, but I can see why they don't necessarily know the consequences of their action. But if it's senior management retaliating against a compliance officer, I'm stuck thinking, like, really? Why are you bothering having a compliance function at all if you, the senior people, aren't even taking it seriously? Like, where are companies coming from where managers think that's a good idea to retaliate against compliance officers? I mean, Nick, I'll put it to you first.
I think the hot take is like compliance for thee, not for me. I'm above all of that. I have high integrity. We don't need a compliance department for me. This is not Nick Gallo saying this, of course. But I think that's how people in positions of power end up kind of thinking, and that's how they end up behaving. And as Mary said, they look at, like the retaliation is coming, to your point, Matt, it's coming from competence. It's somebody being like competent in their job to raise their hand and say, hey, this is kind of off base or something like that. It's not because, they're reporting fraud. They're finding gaps in a system, or they're finding, inequities or, things like that. And I think, like Mary said, those folks are, paradoxically, these watchers or these guardians are being viewed as like saboteurs instead, because they're not falling in line and, genuflecting to leadership. I mean, that's what I think it comes down to. I think it comes down to ego and power.
I actually also, I think it comes down also to diverging interests. So if you're a CEO, if you're a CFO, you have an obligation if you're publicly traded to your shareholders. And if something is going to adversely impact your financials, your shareholders, does that become more important than whatever's being raised by your head of legal, your head of compliance, that sort of thing? And so I think that there's a struggle there, or a friction there, between conflicting priorities.
Mary, what would you say to this? Like, you hear from a lot of compliance officers who get to the window. Like, where do management seem to think this is a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a phenomenon that, and I think Nick said it really well, that management likes, in a way, compliance will often feel like a tick box exercise. We need to have them. They're good to have, but when they get in the way of profits, as Q was saying, we're just going to sort of override them. And I think one of the biggest deterrence to companies is less that there's the potential of a retaliation lawsuit, because we can, as someone was saying, with NDAs and other things, we can buy them off and show them out the door. It's a concern that comes from these whistleblower reward programs that we'll talk about, that, well, wait a minute, if they're not listening to me internally, then they have the option, if it rises to the level of something illegal that the government would be interested in, they have the ability to go external. But what is the C-suite thinking? I mean, I think a lot of it is arrogance in terms of, it might just be the cost of doing business to have to pay somebody off, and we can rotate someone else in here who is less of a, stickler for these sorts of things. So I mean, I think if I were a compliance officer looking for a job, I'd want to look at the turnover rate on how many other people have held my seat and how quickly, because to me, that can also be a signal of what's expected. One of the last things I'd say, I think what really needs to happen so that we get out of this sort of pattern and cycle that you frequently see is just really debunking and changing the myth of who a compliance officer is. And like I said, the parallels between compliance officers and whistleblowers are far too strong, that there's really important research that shows that companies, not only are compliance officers people raising concerns, disclosing things, not only are they not disloyal, they're among your most loyal employees because they give you 100%. An opportunity to course correct. And there's data and studies that came out of George Washington University and University of Utah. Professor Steubens is one of the professors on this study that basically says companies with internal reporting systems that are silent are less profitable than companies who have internal reporting systems that are ringing off the hook, with the idea that if you have created a culture where people feel safe enough to speak out, then you can course correct. So I think these C-suite folks need to see, like, do you really want an environment where everyone's silent and walking in lockstep with you and not raising concerns so that they're looking to the horizon of what potential issues there might be? I mean, maybe that is what you're looking for, but I don't think it shows a healthy culture or a healthy organization.
I'd like to add, Mary, actually, one quick point. I want to add on to what Mary said about when you're looking for a new job and looking for a new opportunity. In addition to that turnover, really try to get a grasp of, is this a point where leadership, your CEO, your C-suite is saying, we need a change in culture, and that's why we're bringing in a compliance officer? Because I think that can be incredibly attractive for a candidate, but at the same time, if they are relying on the chief compliance officer to change the culture, that's not a very realistic expectation. So I think that sometimes there's buyer's remorse from the C-suite in those situations.
Well, yeah, and if a fish stinks, it stinks from the head. You know what I mean?
We have some comments from listeners here. One person, a lot of people talking about hubris and management thinking it is above compliance, but another person who said managers are looking for team players. Nice, easy cliche, but are they looking for team players to close a sale, or are they looking for team players to run an ethical business? And clearly, a lot of them think the team is the one who is, you're part of the team to get the thing done, not to do it the right way. And somebody else there who had talked about C-suites, they want to decide what to do, and you just make sure that it can get done without breaking the law. They don't want to do the work of engaging with compliance about how do we do this wisely and ethically. Some of the comments from people. I wanted to ask a little bit more, Mary, maybe I'll go to you first here, about what the retaliation can actually look like or take the form of. You talked about the 4Ds, or apparently at least a 5th D out there, if not more. But I mean, I think the idea of people trying to gaslight the compliance officer is an important one to unpack. So tell us more about what you've seen, or ways that compliance officers could figure out, okay, this really is retaliation. It's not just me being paranoid. Like, Mary first, and then Q, and then Nick. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this in our prep session, that it can be some of the most subtle behavior to you're all of a sudden being excluded for meetings that you don't even know about, that they just decide to leave you out, right? You are a problem in this sort of dynamic, so we'll just start having the meetings without you. That's obviously one of the, and then it becomes an issue of almost constructive discharge, is the employment lingo, is that you're really just not able to do your job anymore when you start removing the whistleblower from the equation. And then all of a sudden, your performance evaluations, which have all been terrific up until now, we're going to start focusing on bizarre things like you were chronically late. Well, maybe you've been chronically late your whole career, but all of a sudden now chronic lateness is a problem. So there's a lot to look at. So there can be the more subtle stuff, but I've never ceased to be amazed by how juvenile a lot of the behavior can be. be. I always give an example of a woman with dwarfism in a particular environment was a whistleblower, and in reaction to her speaking up, they moved all of the files out of her reach. So you can kind of see where that can go to. The other phenomenon in terms of literal gaslighting that I've seen is I have a number of whistleblowers in the healthcare space who are reporting on Medicare fraud. And I've had 2 of my whistleblowers that I only found out because I put them together sort of to support one another. They've both gone through, luckily, successful False Claims Act lawsuits. But, these cases take a long time, and they needed sort of to basically be advocates to one another. And they both talked about, one of them said, well, I remember when I raised the issue, the next week there was a psychiatrist sent, these are healthcare organizations, a psychiatrist sent to come evaluate me. And the other whistleblower said that exact same thing happened to me. So it goes, so that is the definition of gaslighting, right? Is that if everyone else seemed to been able to get behind this initiative and you can't because of ethical and legal concerns, well, there must be something wrong with you. So much so that we're going to, have a psychiatric evaluation done. So it runs the gamut. Yeah.
Q, what have you seen, or how would you help compliance officers think through what's gaslighting, what's real, what's not real?
Yeah, it is a tough one because I also recognize that when you come forward and you are raising issues or not putting your support behind something, you also are going to be emotionally charged. So how do you differentiate between somebody making an offhand comment because they're just being a jerk and it's a one-time thing versus gaslighting on an ongoing basis? And it's really, really hard. I think that if you're seeing something that is, repeated instances, I think that is a reason to get your spidey senses up. It's hard to go through these things with grace. In some cases, I think that we're all just a bunch of matches rubbing against each other and seeing which one's going to be set on fire first. But I think the easy things are the Ds, the 4 to 5 Ds, 4.5 Ds that we have. The one-offs, sometimes you may have to take that with a little grace, but if you're seeing repeated behavior, I think that is reasonable to think that maybe you are experiencing retaliation.
Somebody else who I thought made an excellent point in the attendee chat, reminding everyone, retaliation is a process, not an event. It goes on and on. It's not like thou hast been retaliated against, now it's done. That's an excellent point. Nick, I don't know if you have any other thoughts here about what you've seen or how compliance officers can try and think through what is really going on to get to the truth of the matter.
I think when you're getting gaslit, you can start to think am I nuts? Am I crazy? Is this really kind of off base? And sometimes it's hard, or am I really off base? And it's hard to kind of objectively assess, are these claims being made against you? Are they valid? And so I think there's a couple of things to look for to maybe validate if there is actual gaslighting going on. And Mary kind of alluded to this, but this incompetency myth, where it's your entire career, you've been a top performer, your entire career, you've been moving up. And then now you start hearing things in reviews you lack executive presence or you're too emotional. Usually if somebody's emotional, assuming that we're not all a bunch of lunatics walking around, it's really rooted down in some passion. And a lot of us in this space are passionate about doing the right thing. We're passionate about, improving companies and leaving it better for those that are coming behind us. That another one I think to look at is a goalpost shift. You can see sort of deadlines move backwards. And so, as bad as it sounds, I think the more you can document and it create at least some source of objective truth to reference against, you can at least kind of start to validate whether this gaslighting is real or not. And once that's happening, then kind of the conversation shifts a little bit, But, somebody said in the chat, and I think they're right, gaslighting happens because it's effective, and it's effective because it allows for or leaves room for plausible deniability. You know what I'm saying? And there's just like so much subjectivity in it. It's very difficult to navigate. Yeah.
I think sorry, one more thing. Adding on to what Nick said, I think if you're experiencing more friction in being able to do your job than you used to, and that friction is consistent, that may be a good indicator.
Great point.
I want to shift gears a bit to how compliance officers can think through some of the preventative steps they might take to avoid retaliation. And I guess I want to start with my thesis, my belief, my hope, is that very few management teams actually state innately, we think compliance sucks. We're happy to violate the law, and if you speak up, we're going to come after you. I think there's not many teams that are that inherently malevolent. If anybody thinks I'm wrong, you want to put it in the chat, bring me down, go right ahead. But I think most managers would probably say, yeah, I like good conduct in theory if you ask them on any random Tuesday, and they sort of talk themselves into an adversarial position with the compliance officer, where it more like you raise an issue and they say, well, is it really that bad? Do we really have to discipline people? Do we really have to report to a regulator? And compliance officers might say, yes, it is really that bad. We do have to take an action, or we have to report it. And the management team winds up thinking, why are you being such an intransigent person here? What is your beef? What is your issue? I guess maybe you are the problem, compliance officer. Like, it's my fear that they sort of sleepwalk into these adversarial relationships. I guess my first question is that true, do you think? I don't know, but I mean, Mary, maybe I'll put it to you first and then Q and Nick. Like, I'm wondering if that's how it happens, that they find themselves that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to say. I don't think they sleepwalk into it. I think that, what frequently happens with these people is that they are coming up against, someone who is going to take the moral high ground, and it's just, that's by definition, their job is there to tell you about the risks. So let them do your job. Let them do their jobs. So I don't know. I think it's a real intractable problem, but one where I think it just needs to be resolved more with just a mindset shift of like, this is what you hired the person to do, is to tell you about the risks, right? And I think one of the things we don't think about frequently in the scenarios, right, is you were describing what happens when someone is saying that there's something wrong afoot, and it's actually by our top performer, right? So then it's just like, it's the lowly compliance officer versus, our top performer who, oh, by the way, while he's grabbing all those sales and closing all those deals, is, sexually harassing people, right? We just are going to look the other way because we find it so, unpalatable that we might, lose that person. And so I think there's sort of short-termism that people look at, like that's the one scenario that we're not gonna value the compliance factor. We're gonna just make sure we protect the top performer, and not seeing that that top performer may start creating some really bad press for us, and may have other problems that relate to all of this.
Where I'm going with this is how compliance officers might try to build the right sort of relationships and the right alliances well ahead of any specific incident that's going to force the issue. Just, hang out with the CEO once a quarter to say, if we ever had an issue, let's do a tabletop exercise on how it might actually go. Or, I don't know, maybe present to the board sometime on here's how a typical retaliation issue might be handled, or here's how a misconduct investigation will go. Kind of bring people into their comfort zone a bit more, that if I have to raise an issue, this is what it's going to feel like when I do. Does that make sense?
And I think that there can be, and I think preventively there can be a lot done with training. There's a wonderful whistleblower who's done, studies social behavioral science at Stanford and talks about, training companies on how to have courageous conversations. And it's obviously, we talk a lot about speak up, but we don't talk about listen up. Like, how do you listen? How do you hear what they're saying? And how do you sort of respond so that you don't immediately get in your defensive crouch and start attacking the person bringing the information forward? And how do we not see that maybe we should value them, and maybe we should look at some of the empirical research, right? I mean, I think that's what I would want to do preventively, is sort of have my C-suite folks recognize a lot of the data that says, like, women whistleblowers of color are retaliated against more severely than are other whistleblowers. In fact, a lot of compliance officers are more likely to leave the corporation than speak up in some of these circumstances, so that, just starting to ground them in, you want these early warning systems. They're there as canaries in the coal mine to help, prevent some really bad things before they metastasize into something bigger. If we can sort of start ingraining that knowledge and empirical data, then maybe when a report really happens, they're better capable of hearing it.
So, yeah, I mean, that's just like some smart kind of scenario planning, or some like disaster, that's kind of just like some disaster planning. Like, if the first time you're having that kind of discussion is on the heels of, speaking up, let's say, you're in a much worse position than if you've laid some of that groundwork beforehand. Sorry to cut you off, Q.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask Q, what do you think about these? How do you bring management into the comfort zone and prep them that, when this happens for real, it's going to feel like this, and it's not going to be pleasant. But like, what could you do?
So I'm going to talk about my personal experience. So one of the things that I did is I partnered a lot with my executives, with my business partners, around issues with clients, because clients are outside. So there's a little bit of us, them. But at the same time, clients are your revenue. So there's, definitely you want to protect your clients. You want to make your clients happy. You don't want them to go away. I had several instances over the years in which we identified a situation in which a client may not be doing something in the right way. And because of the nature of my company's business, that becomes problematic. And so I would work with our vice president of operations and say, okay, we've identified this issue with an employee at our clients. We've got a number of different ways we can address that. And then I would partner with them on how to go about that. So one situation I had was a client employee looked like they may have been falsifying documents. That's not okay. And the question was, how do we address this? Do we just fire the client? Do we go to the client? If so, how do we go to the client? Who do we go to the client? In this situation, and I wanted to bring this up because it goes to something that you said earlier, I volunteered to go forward and have the conversation with the client. That way it took operations out of it. They could maintain a good relationship. I could be a little bit more of the heavy. The problem is that this particular client didn't have a hotline, really didn't have any way to communicate with anyone in this kind of instance. And so I found an email that said, if you have any concerns of this type, send it to this email. So I sent a pretty generic email saying, this is who I am, this is whom I'm with. We have some concerns about one of your employees. Specifically, we've noticed this, and gave them specific instances and said, we wanted to make you aware of this because we think it's an issue and, important for you to be aware of. We aren't asking you to do anything specific, but we wanted to make you aware, let them do their own thing. What happened next was probably one of the most unsettling periods I've ever had. I didn't get retaliated against by my company. I got retaliated against by the client. The client hired outside counsel to call me and berate me about why I would have possibly ever raised this. Apparently that email went directly to their board, so now their board had this information. Surprise! I had no idea, they didn't give me a channel to use. So I got yelled at by an outside attorney, I'm sure was charging $600 an hour or something like that, because how dare I raise this issue, because now they're embarrassed in front of their board. And I I kept my cool, that sort of thing. They also reached out to management. And the nice thing about management was at that point, they're like, it was raised by our compliance officer. We wanted to bring it to you in a confidential manner. We're sorry if it went to your board, but didn't you want to know if this was an issue? Didn't you want to know if this, was going to be a problem? So it's one of those things of, because I had that history in working with sort of an us-them, working with a difficult situation with a client, as I would raise potential issues internally, they already had an idea of how I worked and what that looked like and what they could expect.
All right.
Phenomenal. I love that. I was just going to add that the best defense is a good offense. And by playing offense like that, by talking in we, it allows you to get a lot more information about how these folks think. It gives them a lot more information that you are trying to reinforce, the sort of achievement of the business objectives. You're on the same team, so that when, it's what a phenomenal example. And you know what? That's on them. That's their problem. How are you supposed to know it goes to the board? You know what I mean? That's crazy.
So I wanted to weave in another comment from a listener that I thought was really good. They said, building alliances is great, but management has to be open to the message. I would maybe remind everybody, and you listeners, you could point this out to management and the board. If we were a bunch of IT people talking about cybersecurity risk, and we said, we want to go do some drills on what would actually happen and how it would feel if we had a real cybersecurity event, nobody would think that is crazy. They would all say that makes perfect sense. You could go to them and say, we want to do a drill on what a major ethical misconduct issue would actually feel like. If you don't have one that is making everybody sweat bullets right here and now, I suspect a lot of them would say, well, yeah, that's probably a good idea. We do it for cyber. I guess we should do it for this. And there are ways to engage with management.
Can I interject there, Matt, that but what would a webinar be without talking about AI? So Anthropic did a red teaming exercise where they created a scenario where someone inside the organization was threatening to shut off the AI agent. What would the AI agent do? And of course, the AI agent decides to whistleblow, right? So you do these. This has been happening, in large language with LLMs and with agentic AI, and we see that they've decided to alert the media and alert the SEC. That's what they did. They filed tips to the SEC. So absolutely, we should be doing red teaming on this sort of thing. And in fact, AI labs are doing it already without you in their own environments. So
I should note, one other listener says, okay, I'm a cyber guy. It's not always the case. Sometimes IT admins are reluctant to participate, and people don't like that either. All right, so he's raining on my parade, but we all have our uphill battles to face. I actually, you had mentioned something here, your story about sending an email to the client and nobody knew that was going to go directly to the board. That raises another good point. Someone else had told me that compliance officers at least should be aware of how you're escalating an issue might be perceived by others, because this was an investigator who had said he'd seen numerous management teams that were like, this compliance officer was documenting everything, like they're going to sue us next week, or this compliance officer reported it directly to the board because it was the CFO involved. Oh my goodness. And I'm not saying that you need to therefore soft pedal your approach, but he raised a good point that what we might think of as going by the book and following procedure might look very different to somebody else who's going to think of it as more hostile. I don't know how we thread that needle. I don't know if we should, but I thought it was a point worth including. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that.
Do you think that's more education, that a lot of people don't understand the role of governance and the role that the board plays, that they're the ultimate boss, and that if your boss isn't, behaving, that's the norm, you take it over their head? Is that what happens when, you have a complaint at a restaurant and the server's not helping you, you go over their head? I do think there's some training on governance. I think I'm always mystified by the fact that there seems to be a real knowledge gap behind what the role of the board actually is. I think they just get paid a lot of money and get to go to, great luxury destinations and don't really understand what the role is. I'm not saying that compliance, of course, understands that, but I think maybe other folks in the organization may not be as aware of it.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of taking a page out of Q's playbook. It's an opportunity to educate, to Mary's point, and it's an opportunity to speak in we and reframe what it is. I think, to thread the needle, I think you just have to present it and make sure that a misconception is not going to take root. Like if you're documenting things so that, we have a defense so that if we get sued, we're not kind of caught out over our skis. That's a very different, you're at least addressing the potential negativity bias, which all human beings have, right? In the lack of information, we tend to assume the worst and we fill in any gaps in that information with the most negative thing. If they see you documenting whatever, and they don't have that governance understanding and they don't really understand the scope of a compliance job, without your, framing or without you kind of stepping into that, there is a potential for that to get filled in with some negativity. But again, back to the Q playbook, which we should write a book on that, Q. I'd be happy to write the foreword. It's take every opportunity you can to build alliances, build coalitions within the organization, and show up as a business person who's wearing the same, jersey, speak in we.
And I think having consistency on what you've presented or how you've communicated. So if there's a concern, you don't come forward, you don't go to the board with rumors. You go to the board saying, we found these initial things, we have some concerns, we need to look further. Or if it's not something that's going to the board, if it's going to your C-suite, having that conversation to understand what their expectation is. Are they the kind of executive who wants to know early? And is okay and comfortable in that unknowing, we don't know anything yet, we are starting an investigation? Or do they need to have something solid before they're comfortable, in which case you make sure that you've got something solid before bringing it to them? Or are they the kind of people who just want the problem and the solution on the same plate? That's not always the best, but at least if you know what your audience is expecting and you're consistent in how you provide that, that builds a lot of trust and that partnering and that we.
A couple of people here have been making mention of general counsel or the legal or the HR teams getting involved. And I think it does bring up an interesting point that, I wouldn't necessarily say that they are outright in retaliating against compliance officers. I suspect a lot of listeners would say, yes, they are, but more like there's disagreement about what this issue is or who's handling it what way. The general counsel might say, you don't bring that to the board, bring it to me and I bring it to the board. Or HR might say, we're already investigating this. This is not a thing for you, compliance, to touch. And I could see that there are rules of engagement that might need to be predefined between compliance and legal and HR and how often that might get sticky. Mary, I don't know if you've seen that go south, or Q or Nick, but maybe in that order, how important is it that we have these rules of engagement spelled out?
Boy, I think it can only help, but I think it's a case-by-case scenario. You can have these well-defined org chart of this is how the path of, but sometimes, ideally, wouldn't you have cooperation and collaboration among all three? I think you don't want it to be siloed, and you should probably be having simultaneous conversations. So I'm not sure that there's necessarily a one size fits all here.
Hugh, have you seen these things happen?
Yeah, so typically my experience has been you go together because it lends, some solidity to the message that's being conveyed and that it's not just one person. I think that there also needs to be a plan as to who, as you pointed out, if HR is already investigating something and it's gotten beyond sort of their scope into other things, let's say, should they still be investigating or should now that investigation go someplace else? Or depending on the nature of the allegations or the concerns, who is the best entity or group to actually investigate? Because if it's something serious, if it's something with the C-suite or a high-level executive, you want to make sure you've got your ducks in a row because this is going to get serious pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. All right. So in the last 15 minutes, let's shift gears a bit to how you decide. Let's say the worst has happened. You have suffered retaliation. You've penetrated through the gaslighting. This has happened. how a compliance officer would then evaluate their choices from there. I mean, you could quit, you could fight it, you could, in theory, file a lawsuit or turn whistleblower to a regulator. And I'm struggling with how a compliance officer would think that through and decide what to do. Mary, what have you seen them struggle with, especially around the idea of, should I file a lawsuit because I've been fired? Should I turn to the regulators because they're just not listening and this is a big deal? Like, what does that thought process look like from your perspective?
Well, you're not going to be surprised to hear me say you should talk to a lawyer and you should do it soon. Sort of to Q's point, like, do you serve it up, the solution and the problem on the same plate? Let's hope not, because I think if you engage a lawyer earlier in the process, maybe you can get to a point where there is less retaliation, you've done more mitigation, and you're not to the point of, as you've served up the hypo, that we're talking about quitting or going to a regulator. So I do think that there's often, I observe that prospective clients are coming to me long after the problem has gotten much more worse than maybe it needed to, and the horse is out of the barn. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the best things to do, is that, and this is where the world of whistleblowing and whistleblowing lawyers gets really confusing, is that the hat I wear is, I'm not an employment lawyer, but I play one on TV. I joke, but I work very closely with employment counsel. They are arm in arm with me. So there's often for my clients, there will often be 3 types of lawyers that have to be engaged that all would wear a whistleblower hat. A regulatory lawyer, where I'm helping you bring your information to a regulator. I'm sort of the matchmaker, taking people with well-placed insiders with really important information and putting them with the agencies who want to pay them for that information because it rises to some, legal violation. But then there's also employment lawyers who are going to help you with, do you have a retaliation claim? And one of the big questions employment lawyers always ask is like, you may have a really strong claim, but if you're going to immediately find another job, you've mitigated your damages, and maybe that's not, it's not a great use of your time to bring a claim when the damages would be so small because you've gone on to be gainfully employed somewhere. So I think, and then there can be criminal lawyers if you are, an executive and you may have been, going along with this kind of behavior. Then sometimes we have to bring in criminal folks to talk about, before you go to the regulator, should we talk about what your exposure could be here? Hopefully that doesn't happen for many compliance officers, but it is and can be one of those scenarios. So I think when you're looking at your questions of, do I quit? What do I do? I think most employment lawyers would tell you that, going the avenue of, if you still want to be employed in an organization, often going the avenue of a retaliation claim is just hard to walk back, right? It's just that, if that's going to go into litigation, you've now, it's hard to imagine how you work in that workplace again. That's not to say that those claims aren't important to bring. I'm just saying, just the realities on the ground. You imagine, and I've seen it played out when I was a law clerk, and I watched a lot of trials on employment cases. The judge and I would go back into chambers and just like, how do these people work together again after this? So I think there's a lot to be done, but there could be some prevention in getting a lawyer in early. And sometimes the lawyers will just send a little, can send a nastygram that basically to the employer that basically says, this is starting to smell of retaliation. And, that can sort of stop the behavior. And maybe there could be some sort of a solution needed out.
Q and then Nick, what are your thoughts here? I mean, I've seen some user comments here, basically people saying the mental energy required to persevere. Sometimes it's just so much you quit and give up. And I'm not going to dispute that. But Q, what would you say or think through? And then Nick, what would you say?
So the 2 things I agree, having a conversation with an attorney early is going to be helpful because they're going to ask questions to help you parse whether Are you being oversensitive? Are you being gaslighted? Are you being retaliated against? So having that one-on-one going through things. But at the same time, if you're being retaliated against, if this has been going on for a while, you're going to be, frankly, emotionally sensitive. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a natural reaction. Don't treat your attorney as your therapist, but make sure you're also taking care of you. If you need to go talk to somebody, go talk to somebody. Talk to a counselor, talk to a trusted advisor, whatever that looks like, to help you start separating the feelings from the events so that you can perhaps be able to take that step back and be a little more rational around, what do I need to do next? Do I want to go in this direction? Do I want to file a lawsuit? Lawsuit's going to be a really long time, and as that listener pointed out, exhausting. As well as, it's going to take a while for you to job after that. So that's what I would say is try to separate the emotions that you're feeling from the events, and a lot of self-care.
Nick, what would you say to advise people? How do they get through this sort of thing?
I just think you have to kind of ask the question of like, what game are you trying to play? Are you trying to fight City Hall? Is Rome burning and you're throwing buckets on it? Like if you're not going to be able to turn it around, you can't think about like a quiet exit as a failure. Like you maybe showed up with great intentions, and this happened to a friend of mine. They went through the interview process, and there was all this talk about a culture of integrity and all these kinds of things. And once they got inside the organization and they were there for a while, they started to see a bunch of, let's just say not good things happening kind of at the executive level. At some point, you got to get off of the sinking ship. And I think, there is a lot of bravery in like leaving a abusive relationship, let's say, with your sanctity intact. If you don't want to go that route, and you're wealthy and patient, and you want to kind of go through, like Mary said, a lawsuit with your organization, then you also can go that route. But I think, coming to things like this and talking to other people that have been through it, there's been a lot of great, comments in the chat. And to Q's point, it's kind of difficult to kind of sort through the fog of it all, because there's emotions and there's, room for misinterpretations. There's your own negativity bias. There's all this stuff kind of swirling around. I think being able to kind of zoom back from the trees to kind of see the forest a little bit can maybe allow you to figure out what the best tack forward is. So there's no kind of silver bullet answer. I think it's going to be a question of like where you're at in your career, the extent to which you think you can like I said, sort of fight City Hall and drive change forward, and the extent to which you want to, move on to something else. But just keep in mind, just to keep it all in perspective, not to get morbid here, nobody has their like company name on their tombstone. You know what I'm saying? Like there's probably organizations that are going to be more open to, the kind of impact that you're going to have. We had the Ethicsverse last week was, somebody came on talking about the employment opportunities in our space. This is not a shrinking industry. This industry is growing. There's a ton of tailwinds. The regulations continue to increase. So don't get that sort of fixed mindset, that kind of, that fixed mindset that says like, well, this is the only job I can get. Your jobs are, your skills are transferable. You shouldn't feel like you're handcuffed to a radiator at your company.
Here's a question from a listener, and Mary, this might go to you as the lawyer out there, but this person was wondering how common might it be for compliance officers to wind up parting ways under an NDA with a severance payout. I don't know if you've encountered that, but I was thinking a related question of, if you see something bad and you're worried about retaliation, and then for whatever reason you decide, so I'm just going to shut up and pretend I don't see it either. I'm kind of wondering, do you also have legal exposure that might then attach to you? I mean, what are the risks of just turning a blind eye? What would you say, Mary?
They are not zero. There are certainly plenty of risks, and that's sort of the dilemma that a lot of my clients will face, is that, where do I go? What do I do? And so I think it can be difficult. I would... I just think that the criminal exposure, it tends to be, you have to think like a prosecutor, right? And like the criminal prosecutors are not often going to go after necessarily the compliance officer. They start with thinking about who are the architects of the fraud, who conceived of the scheme, and who's going to financially benefit from it. Like, it's often those C-suite folks. That's really who they're looking at. But that doesn't mean that you still don't have exposure, right? It's, it's hub and spoke conspiracy theory. Like, if you're part of this practice and you're going along with it, then there can be some complicity. Is there a lot of criminal risk? It depends on the facts, but maybe not, but enough that you can't ignore it. So I think the longer you stay along to go along to get along, and a lot of people do. And of course, it's, you may be a single parent and you need the job, and there may be all these reasons. But I think one of the best things you can do for yourself, and we hadn't talked about this earlier, is just finding an exit for yourself so that, you could maybe negotiate on your way out the door. Like a good reference. That may be the most important thing for you to get, rather than some sort of payout for retaliation. Could just be a good recommendation for your next job. Like, there are other things that could be wins here. But I think that finding a new organization, you're not going to survive in that organization for very long if you're deciding, like, I'm just going to put my nose down and continue to, work here when I know that there's a lot of wrongdoing afoot. That's not a long-term solution. So I think one of the best things you can do for yourself is find another job while you're still in your current job. And sometimes make sure that on your way out the door, a lot of people will choose to, in their exit interview, as a protective measure. Hopefully the company does an exit interview. If they didn't feel comfortable raising the concerns before then, should do it at that point, sort of as a record. It can be a protective exercise to do it then.
Q, I don't know if you have any thoughts here for another minute or so, but then after that, Nick, I'll let you wrap it up and give the closing remarks. But this has been a great conversation so far.
Great conversation. I have nothing to add on the legal side. I leave that to Mary.
So first, Nick, I don't know if we ever have kept records on how many comments we have from attendees, but it seems like we have about 4 million comments throughout this hour. It's been a fantastic conversation.
It has been a fantastic conversation. And this topic, I think, deserves a lot of more attention. I think, compliance can be a very lonely job. We feel like we're trying to, we're the only ones sort of fighting the fires of integrity in our organizations. And there's all these headwinds when it happens that threaten our livelihood and threaten our pocketbook and threaten, the support of our families. To the extent that, we're scared of losing our job and so forth. I just want to say that appreciate all of you guys for coming. I appreciate Mary and Q and, of course, you, Matt, for setting this up. Like, we live in a world of abundance. This is not a world of scarcity. So the skill sets that we have, the skill sets that we've acquired in these roles are transferable across the world, frankly. And I think, we don't want to get into a situation where we're myopically looking at the situation we're in, and these walls are closing in, and we feel like we're stuck. Like, you're never stuck. Don't sell yourself short, and don't sell your soul. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't sell out. The things that are important from a values perspective, from an integrity perspective, the vision you have for a future that is better for those that are coming behind you, that are better workplaces, like, those are all attainable things. That doesn't mean that every single ship is not going to sink, right? Like, there are ships that are going to sink, and there are places that, like I said, the fish thinks it stinks from the head. There are psychopaths and sociopaths that ascend to positions of power. Okay, we all see that all around us all the time. So it's really about trying to find a place that is going to value you, that looks at the world the same way, that has a similar ethos to you. And if it's not this place, there's a door. So walk out the door and find something else. Like, watch last week's episode. I think that was a really inspiring episode. It's on YouTube. And you can hear from somebody who's on the front lines filling positions in compliance all the time, that there are tons of positions out there. Sign up for Matt's newsletter. He's always sharing about positions that are out there. Grow your network. Connect with the people on, in the Ethicsverse, and connect with people online, and get out there. There was so much great advice from Q and from Mary, and Matt, you had so many great ideas. I just think, now is the time to take your career in your hands, take your life in your hands, and build the life that you want. So I feel totally inspired from this. I really loved it. Thank you all for your comments. And we have 2 great episodes next week. So we're talking about my favorite topic, work slop, work slop is the epidemic that's running through all of our organizations. So we got a healthcare episode on Tuesday, managing the AI work slop problem. And then next Thursday, coolest place to be, we're going to be amplifying compliance influence, mastering storytelling, and personal branding. So these are 2 episodes you are not going to want to miss. Love you all. See you next week.
Thank you.